ओमज्ञानातिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मह्यं ददति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलान् श्रीगुरुवैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगणरघुनाथान्विताम् तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितंश्च नमां विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नाम्ने नमस्ते सारस्वतीदेवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधरा श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. We are reading from Śrīla Prabhupāda-līlāmṛta, Volume 1, Chapter 24, second part, continuing. In New York, the boys had their orders from Prabhupada not to give any more money to Mr. Price unless there was a purchase contract. Prabhupada still wanted the building. He had written to Brahmananda on March 4th, I hope when I go to New York next I shall enter the new house forthwith. And he had written Rayarama on March 7. I am very glad to learn that Brahmananda, yourself, and all others had transcendental courage to take all risks for Krishna, and this act will enhance your glory in Krishna consciousness. But he wanted them not to be cheated by false promises. Meanwhile, Mr. Price was asking the devotees to turn over $5,000 to his financier friend, Mr. Hall, who would then add 20,000 and make the down payment to owner. Mr. Taylor, mm, Mr. Price wanted Brahmananda to get the point across to His Excellency that negotiations had to be done in this fashion and right away if they seriously wanted to get the house. Brahmananda wrote to Prabhupada asking him to advise the bank to transfer 5,000 into the account controlled by the boys, the trustees of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Prabhupada gave permission and asked that the check be signed by the president and secretary because Brahmananda and Saswarupa are main support for purchasing this house, and Kirtanananda is a supplement to this from his kitchen department. But he said that the check should be made to the seller, Mr. Taylor, not to the financial Mr. Hall. The money and the society is yours. Srila Prabhupada acknowledged. You can spend in any way, but it is my duty to give you advice as ever well-wisher. Then Mr. Price invited Brahmananda to meet Mr. Hall and suggested that Brahmananda come prepared with a check for 5,000. On the way, Mr. Price explained that Mr. Hall was perhaps the biggest real estate dealer in Manhattan, a multi-millionaire. He owned skyscrapers. Everything he owned was big. When Brahmananda entered Mr. Hall's office, he thought it was right out of a Hollywood movie. A conference room 10 times bigger than the Second Avenue Temple room, and seated at the head of the large oval table was Mr. Hall himself. The room was in semi-darkness with a few spotlights on Mr. Hall, who sat before a battery of telephones. Even as they began to discuss, Mr. Hall paused several times, picking up phones and talking to persons in various places across the country. Young man, Mr. Hall said to Brahmananda, we are helping you to get the house. It is a beautiful house, a New York City landmark. Then Mr. Hall's girlfriend called from a boat in the Caribbean. He talked to her for a while and then returned to Brahmananda and Mr. Price, who sat in the shadows at his conference table. Mr. Hall had a big contract he wanted Brahmananda to sign. Brahmananda knew that Swamiji wanted a contract, and here it was. He also knew that if he signed over the 5,000, he would have no other money and no extra income, and he knew they knew it. But Swamiji wanted the building. Swamiji himself had looked at 100,000 buildings, at $100,000 buildings and had offered to buy them, even though he had very little money to back his offers up. And Brahmananda always did whatever Swamiji said. To sign this contract, Brahmananda concluded, was an act of faith in Swamiji and Krishna. He didn't analytically ask, where will the rest of the money come from? To do so, he thought would be like doubting Swamiji. So here he was in this big time financier's office. It was awesome. The millionaires were going to help. Mr. Price was at Brahmananda's elbow. Mr. Hall was telling Brahmananda that everything was all right. We are going to get you this house. Now it's actually going to happen. Here was one of the biggest men in Manhattan offering to help. And whereas Brahmananda had no money, Mr. Hall would be able to pick up the place very easily from the owner. Glancing quickly over the contract Brahmananda signed, it was a deal and he gave them the check for $5,000. As soon as Brahmananda and Mr. Price left Mr. Hall's office, there was a distinct change in Mr. Price. Although still acting as Brahmananda's friend, he now said, now you have to get this money. As they walked together on the uptown streets, Mr. Price cheerfully pushed the whole thing onto Brahmananda. That was a change. Before Mr. Price had been saying that he and Mr. Hall were going to do it, but now he said that it was all up to devotees. Brahmananda asked about the legal position. Mr. Price explained that only the Krishna society was bound. But what about the promises? What about Mr. Hall's being so rich and wanting to help them and Mr. Price wanting to help? Mr. Price assured Brahmananda that he and Mr. Hall did want to help. They were doing everything they could, but Brahmananda and the other devotees should also do everything they could and come up with the $20,000 to complete the down payment by end of the month. And what if they couldn't? Mr. Price made it very clear. If you don't pay the balance in a month, then you lose your deposit. By the time Brahmananda reached 26 Second Avenue, he realized he had been cheated. He was crushed. He turned to other devotees and told them what had happened, but they could only return, why did you do it? Brahmananda phoned Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco. Now that his eyes have been opened about Mr. Price, Brahmananda was blunt about his mistake and he told Prabhupada that he had given away the $5,000. All of it is gone? Srila Prabhupada asked. Yeah, Brahmananda replied. He heard Prabhupada hang up the phone. Brahmananda had been about to explain the whole thing, but Swamiji had just hung up without a word. Brahmananda placed the receiver back on the hook. He was shaken. The next day, the trustees held a special meeting. The boys sat around in front room of Prabhupada's apartment, trying to decide what to do. Gargamuni again called Prabhupada, who advised them to stop the check at the bank. Swamiji, as smart as a fox. Raya Ram smiled. Gargamuni phoned the bank, but it was too late. The check had been already cashed. They consulted Mr. Goldsmith, their friendly lawyer. He said it sounded like a weak legal case. Price and Hall hadn't legally bound themselves to pay anything if their devotees failed to pay, and if the devotees couldn't pay the $20,000 balance by the end of the month, they would lose their $5,000 deposit. They could sue for fraud, but court fees would be costly. Then, one by one, Brahmananda, Satsvarupa, Kirtanananda, Rayarama, Gargamuni, and others began to look at the letters from Prabhupada and discuss how he had warned them to avoid being cheated. Their greatest blunder, they began to realize, was disobeying his instructions. He had told them not to trust the promises of these businessmen, and he had told them that the check should be made only to the owner, not to the financier. Within a few days, further instructions from their spiritual master came in the mail. There were admonishments, but hearing from him, even if he was chastising them, was being better than pain of his hanging up the phone without a word. But you have but you have not followed my instructions and now you are in trouble, he wrote to the boys. He wrote Rayaram, you are all foolish boys. I repeatedly warned you, even at the last point, that we should not pay the check unless there was agreement between Mr. Taylor and Mr. Hull. The agreement was signed like a marriage ceremony without the presence of the bridegroom. The mistake was there, and now you are repenting. To Satswarupa, he wrote, "You have asked me whether the San Francisco branch will pay some money for purchasing the house, but where is your house and where is the purchase? So far, it is talks of Mr. Price and Company in which you innocent boys have been entrapped. I do not know how I can help you in your great blunder. I can only hope that Krishna will help you." Unlike the boys and their lawyers, Prabhupada thought that the legal case against the businessman would be a strong one. I am not a lawyer, but this is common sense affair. Mr. Hall has taken the money and he must finance to purchase the house. If he has no money to finance, then it is a cheating case, clear and simple. The culprits, he said, should be brought to criminal court. Their conspiracy and fraud were obvious and could be proven. From the telephonic conversation of Brahmananda, it appeared to be an organized cheating case, and you have to face with courage without excusing any one of them. We are not revengeful, but we cannot lose Krishna's money for nothing. The boys had already blundered so much that Prabhupada doubted whether they could tackle the cheaters. But he said they had to try. Let us have the house or return back the money. In default, there is clear case of cheating. Now you can do as you like. Srila Prabhupada wrote the boy's lawyer, relating the history of the case. He also wrote a letter to the financier, the owner, and Mr. Price, threatening to expose everything, including what he alone had seen, that the lawyers involved were also implicated. Brahmananda could barely understand what was going on, but it appeared that Swamiji was going to get results. The boys were fools, certainly, but the businessmen were certainly cheaters, and Swamiji claimed that he would prove it in court. While admonishing his blundering disciples and going fiercely after the cheaters, Srila Prabhupada still remained the ultimate shelter for his foolish boys. In a letter to the six trustees of his New York branch, he shed transcendental light into their gloomy minds. Forget the chapter. Take it for granted that Krishna has taken away this money from you for your deliberate foolishness. In future, be very careful and abide by the orders of Krishna. If you abide by the orders of Krishna, he can give you things that you may need. Be cheerful and chant Hare Krishna without any lamentation. As I have told you several times, that my Guru Maharaj used to say that this world is not a fit place for a gentleman. His version is corroborated by the following verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. It is said, Yasya asti bhagavati akinchana bhakti sarvai gunais tatra samasate sura haro abhakshyas abhaktasya kuto mahat guna manorathe asato dhavato bhai. A person who is not in Krishna consciousness has no good qualifications. However, so called gentleman one may be or academically educated he may be, he is hovering over the mental plane and therefore he must commit nuisance being involved in influenced by the external energy. A person who has, however, unflinching faith in Supreme Personality of Godhead has all the good qualifications of the demigods. In other words, you should not keep your trust on so-called gentlemen of the world, however nicely dressed he may be. In the matter of discharging our mission of Krishna consciousness, we have to meet so many so-called gentlemen, but we must be very cautious for dealing with them as we are cautious in dealing with serpents. Now, more than ever, the boys in New York wanted Swamiji to come back. Although most of the talk in the temple was still about real estate, they were holding regular kirtana and lecture programs, and two new boys have joined. Yadurani had finished some new paintings of Lord Vishnu, which now hung in the temple, and she was waiting anx- anxiously for Swamiji to come and see them. Some devotees had made a new speaker's seat in the temple for Swamiji. They knew they were fools, but they also asked him please to come back. He agreed. He set April 9th as the date for his return to New York, but meanwhile he still had much to do in San Francisco. One day Malati hurried into Srila Prabhupada's apartment, took a small item out of her shopping bag and placed it on Prabhupada's desk for his inspection. What is this, Swamiji? Srila Prabhupada looked down and beheld a 3-inch wooden doll with a flat head, a black smiling face, and big round eyes. The figure had stubbly forward-jutting arms and a small green and yellow torso with no visible feet. Srila Prabhupada immediately folded his palms and bowed his head, offering the little figure respects. You have brought Lord Jagannath, the Lord of the universe, he said smilingly and bright eyed. He is Krishna. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada beamed with pleasure while Malati and others sat amazed at their good fortune of seeing Swamiji so pleased. Prabhupada explained that this was Lord Jagannath, a deity of Krishna worshipped all over India for thousands of years. Jagannath, he said, is worshipped along with two other deities, his brother Balarama and his sister Subhadra. Excitedly, Malati confirmed that there were other similar figures at Cost Plus and Cost Plus, the import store where she had found the little Jagannath. And Srila Prabhupada said she should go back and buy them. Malati told her husband Shyamasundara, and together they hurried back and bought the two other dolls in set. Srila Prabhupada placed the black-faced, smiling Jagannath on the right. In the center, he placed the smallest figure, Subhadra, who had a red, smiling mouth and a rectangular black and yellow torso. The third figure, Balarama, with a white, round head, red rimmed eyes, and a happy red smile, had the forward jutting arms like Jagannath and a blue and yellow base. Prabhupada placed him next to Subhadra. As Prabhupada looked at them together on his desk, he asked if anyone knew how to carve. Shamasundara said he was a wooden sculptor, and Prabhupada asked him to carve 3 foot high copies of little Jagannath, Balarama, and Subhadra. More than 2000 years ago, Srila Prabhupada told them there was a king named Indradumna, a devotee of Lord Krishna. Maharaj Indradumna wanted a statue of the Lord as he had appeared when he and his brother and sister had travelled on the chariot to the holy field of Kurukshetra during a solar eclipse. When the king requested a famous artist from the heavenly planet Vishwakarma to sculpture the forms, Vishwakarma agreed, on the condition that no one interrupt his work. The king waited for a long time while Vishwakarma worked behind locked doors. One day, however, the king felt he could wait no longer and he broke in to see the work in progress. Vishwakarma, true to his word, vanished, leaving behind the uncompleted forms of three deities. The king was nevertheless so pleased with the wonderful form of Krishna, Balaram, and Subhadra that he decided to worship them as they were. He installed them in a temple and began worshipping them with great opulence. Since that time, Srila Prabhupada continued, Lord Jagannath has been worshipped all over India, especially in the province of Orissa, where there is a great temple of Lord Jagannath at Puri. Each year at Puri, during the gigantic Rath Yatra festival, millions of pilgrims from all over India come to worship Lord Jagannath, Balaram, and Subhadra as the deities ride in the procession on three huge carts. Lord Chaitanya, who spent the last 18 years of his life as Jagannath Puri, used to dance and chant in ecstasy before the deity of Lord Jagannath during the yearly Rath Yatra festival. Seeing this appearance of Lord Jagannath in San Francisco as the will of Krishna, Prabhupada said that they should be careful to receive and worship Lord Jagannath properly. If Shyamsundar could carve the forms, Prabhupada said he would personally install them in temple and the devotees could then begin worshipping the deities. San Francisco, he said, could be renamed New Jagannath Puri. He chanted Jagannatha Swami Nayanapatagami Bhavatume. This is a mantra for Lord Jagannath. He said Jagannath means Lord of the universe. O Lord of the universe, kindly be visible unto me. It is very auspicious that he has chosen to appear here. Shamasundara bought 3 large blocks of hard wood and Prabhupada made a sketch and pointed out a number of details. Using the small statues, Swami Shyam Sundar calculated ratios and new dimensions and began carving on the balcony of his apartment. Meanwhile, the devotees bought the rest of the tiny Jagannath from Cost Plus, and it became a fashion to glue a little Jagannath to a simple necklace and wear him around the neck. Because Lord Jagannath was very liberal and merciful to the most fallen, Srila Prabhupada explained, the devotees would soon be able to worship him in their temple. The worship of the form of Radha and Krishna in the temple required very high strict standards, which the devotees were not yet able to meet. But Lord Jagannath was so merciful that he could be worshipped in a simple way, mostly by chanting Hare Krishna, even if the devotees weren't very much advanced. Prabhupada set March 26th, the appearance day of Lord Chaitanya, as the day for installing the deities. The devotees would have a big feast and begin worshipping Lord Jagannath. Prabhupada said they would have to build an altar and he told them how to prepare it. While Shyamasundar hurried to finish his carving, a small splinter lodged itself in his hand and the wound became infected. Finally, Shyamsundar got blood poisoning and became so sick that he had to go to the hospital. Lord Jagannath was taking away the reactions to Shyamsundar's previous sinful activities, Prabhupada said. On March 26, the appearance day of Lord Chaitanya, Prabhupada said that during the morning they would stay together in the temple, read about Lord Chaitanya, and hold kirtan, and in the evening they would have a ceremony for installing Lord Jagannath. Having fasted until moonrise, they would then break fast with a prasadam feast. When Srila Prabhupada entered the temple that morning, he saw the work the devotees had done. The new altar stood in the rear of the room above where his dais has been, and his dais was now on the right side of the room against the wall. From his seat, he would be able to see the altar very easily. The altar was a simple red wood plank 7 feet above the floor and fixed between two thick red wood pillars. A canopy covered the place where the deities would stand. Below the altar hung Haridas' painting of Lord Chaitanya and his associates dancing during Kirtan, and behind the painting was a Madras backdrop. About 3 feet above the floor, a shelf below the painting held candlesticks and would be used for articles to be offered to the deities. Prabhupada took his seat. As usual, he led Kirtan and then chanted one round of japa with the devotees. Then he had Hayagriva read aloud from the biographical sketch of Lord Chaitanya from the first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. But many devotees were sleepy despite Hayagriva's reading loudly with force and elocution. Although Prabhupada was listening attentively and wanted the others to sit with him and hear about Lord Chaitanya, when he saw that so many were dozing, he stopped the reading and held another kirtan. Then he chanted japa with them for about 15 minutes. All right, he said, we will read again. Who will read? Leelavati flew up urgently. All right, he had he had her sit near his dais and someone placed a microphone before her. Leelavati's reading presented a contrast to the deep tone of Hayagriva, but she was another scholarly voice. Her careful pronunciation of Sanskrit words and phrases was pleasing to Srila Prabhupada, and he several times commented, "Oh, very nice." Leelavati was thrilled and read on intensely, determined to keep everyone awake. That evening, devotees and hippies guests filled the room to capacity. Prabhupada was present and the mood was reverential and festive. It was a special event. The just finished deities sat on the altar and everyone was glancing at them as they stood on the redwood shelf beneath a yellow canopy, their features illuminated by spotlights. The deities wore no clothes or ornaments but were freshly painted in bright black, red, white, green, yellow, and blue. They were smiling. Srila Prabhupada was also glancing at them, looking up to their high altar. Prabhupada lectured about the four social and four spiritual orders of life described in the Vedic literatures. According to one's quality and work, he said each person has a certain occupational duty, but the ultimate goal of that duty, he explained, is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. It doesn't matter if one is low born or poor, material qualification has nothing to do with spiritual evolution. Spiritual evolution is that with your talent, with your capacity, with your work, you have to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada gave the example of Sridhara, an impoverished devotee of Lord Chaitanya who earned the equivalent of less than 5 cents a day, yet offered half his earnings in worship of the Ganges. If one were rich, however, one should still give half his wealth to the service of the Lord. Prabhupada cited Rupa Goswami, who had given 50% of his wealth for Krishna consciousness, given 25% for his family, and saved 25% for emergencies. Suddenly, Prabhupada began speaking about the money his disciples in New York had lost and 25% for himself so that in times of emergency, because as soon as money is gone out of my hand, I have no control. We have recently lost 6,000, not here, in our New York. So as soon as the check is out of hand, now it is gone. It is gone. Prabhupada gestured to indicate money flying from like a bird out of his hand. At this reference to the troubling, entangling affair with Mr. Price and the foolish boys and their hard-earned money gone, Prabhupada paused for a moment. Then he continued with the lecture. Paying attention to Bhagavan, the Supreme Person, is practical. Srila Prabhupada said. Here is Krishna. Krishna's form is there. Krishna's color is there. Krishna's helmet is there. Krishna's advice is there. Krishna's instruction is there. Krishna's sound is there. Everything Krishna. Everything Krishna. There is no difficulty. But if you turn your attention to the impersonal and to the super soul in the heart as the yogis do, then it is very difficult. It is very difficult. You cannot fix your attention to impersonal. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that klesho dikataras tesham avyakta saktas chetasam. Those who are attached to the impersonal feature of the absolute truth, their business is very troublesome. It is not like chanting, dancing, and eating. This is very nice, but that is very troublesome. And even if you speculate on the impersonal, the result that is achieved by working hard for many, many lives is that will have to also eventually come to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada continued describing Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, citing evidence from scriptures like Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Samhita. The first step in spiritual life, he explained, was to hear from Krishna himself. But Prabhupada warned that if one heard the class and then went outside and forgot, he could not improve. Whatever you are hearing, you should say to others, Prabhupada said, and he gave the example of how disciples were writing in Back to Godhead what they had heard from their spiritual master, and to speak or write what one has heard, a person has to be thoughtful. You are hearing about Krishna and you have to think. Then you have to speak. Otherwise it is not otherwise it will not work. So Shrotavya Kirtanavyascha Dhyaya Pujasyascha, and you should worship. Therefore, you require this deity for worshipping. We have to think of, we have to speak, we have to hear, we have to worship. Pujasyascha. And should we do this occasionally? No, Nityada, regularly. Regularly. This is the process. So anyone who adopts this process, he can understand the absolute truth. This is clear declaration of Srimad Bhagavatam. Thank you very much. Any question? A young boy raised his hand and began earnestly. Well, you mentioned about how we should follow the supreme law, how we should be like what your spirit tells you, or what your supreme, whatever it tells you. Whatever it tells you. If you meditate a lot, you feel you should do something. Prabhupada, it is not something, it must be actual fact. Boy. Yeah, Prabhupada, so there is no question of something. Well, I see. Prabhupada, something is vague. You must speak what is that something. Boy. Well, let's say be Prabhupada, that you cannot express. That means you have no idea. So we have to learn. This is the process. I am speaking of the process. If you want to have knowledge of the absolute truth, the first thing is faith. Then you must be thoughtful. Then you must be devoted. And you must hear from authentic sources. These are the different methods. And when you come to the ultimate knowledge from Brahman platform to the Paramatma platform, then to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then your duty shall be to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the perfection of your active life. These are the processes, and it is concluded that everyone never mind what he is, his duty is to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And how can we satisfy? We have to hear about him, we have to speak about him, we have to think about him, we have to worship him, and that is regularly. This will help you. But if you have no worship, if you have no thought, if you have no hearing, if you have no speaking, and if you are simply thinking of something, that something is not God. Boy, I mean, well, I am so young, I didn't know what I meant. I don't know what, Prabhupada, don't know that I am speaking, that you have to know by these processes. We are all don't knows, so we have to know this is the process. Young woman, since we don't yet understand the supreme law because we are young and just new to this, then how can we speak about it? Prabhupada, therefore, you have to hear. The first thing is Shrotavyas. You have to hear. Unless you hear, how can you speak? We are therefore giving you facility to hear. You hear and then you can speak. Then you can think. We are giving all the facility to hear, to speak, to think, to worship. This is the society's work. Unless you hear, how can you speak? The first task is given Shrotavya, then Kirtavyascha, Dhyayas, Pujascha, Nityada. These are the processes. You have to hear, and hearing, you have to repeat, chant, and then you have to think. You have to worship. These are the processes. Upendra, Swamiji, so we have to hear, I understand, but do we speak? Or do we first listen for a long time and then speak? Prabhupada, no. Why a long time? Suppose you hear two lines, you repeat that two lines. And aside from everything else, you hear Hare Krishna. So you can chant Hare Krishna. What is the difficulty there? Shrotavya Kirtavyascha. You have to hear and chant. If you cannot remember all the topics which we are speaking from Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, you can at least remember this Hare Krishna. Therefore, it is the easiest process. You hear Hare Krishna and chant Hare Krishna. The other things will come automatically. Now, this is possible for everyone. Even the child can repeat Hare Krishna. What is the difficulty? You hear the Hare Krishna and chant Hare Krishna. We are not giving you very difficult or troublesome task. Then everything will follow. We are giving you everything. But if you feel in the beginning it is difficult, then you can do this. This is very nice. Chant Hare Krishna. You are doing that actually. Hearing and chanting. This process will help you. It is a basic principle of advancement in spiritual life. Without hearing, we shall simply concoct, waste our time, and mislead people. We have to hear from the authoritative sources. Srila Prabhupada paused. The philosophical talk had been rigorous, lasting about 45 minutes. He wasn't tired. He could have gone on. But now he wanted to conduct the deity installation. Everything necessary for spiritual life was here: the temple, the devotees, the books, the deity, prasadam. He wanted these young people to take advantage of it. Why should they remain living like animals and thinking of spiritual life as a way groping for something? They should take advantage of Krishna's mercy and be successful and happy. And for this, Prabhupada was their tireless servant. Prabhupada, so Hayagriva, come here. Prabhupada had had the devotees arrange for a large candle on a plate. The ceremony he had planned would be a simple one, with devotees and guests one after another coming up and offering the flame in circles before the Jagannath deities. This should be lighted up. Srila Prabhupada said, and when there is kirtan, one must be doing like this before the deity. Srila Prabhupada moved his hands around in a circle before the deities. You see? Yes, I agree, says Prabhupada, yes, with the kirtan, and then when one person is tired, he should hand it over to another person, devotee. When he is tired, he should give it to another, as long as the kirtan will go on. This should be done with the kirtan just now. Do you follow? Yes. You begin, and when you are tired, you hand over to another, and you hand over to another. It will go on like that. Srila Prabhupada from his seat guided Hayagriva in approaching the deity with the little candle. Some of the girls tittered with nervous expectations. Before the deity, Srila Prabhupada said, all right, now better begin Kirtan. Prabhupada began playing kartals and singing the Hare Krishna mantra to the popular melody he had introduced in America. Just in front, he called out, gesturing to Hayagriva to stand more directly before the deity. Devotees and guests began rising to their feet and dancing, arms raised, bodies swaying rhythmically back and forth as they faced the bright personal form of the deities enchanted. Colored lights within the canopy began flashing intermittently blue, red, and yellow, highlighting the extraordinary eyes of Lord Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram. Mukunda, who had arranged the lights, smiled and looked to Swamiji, hoping for arrival. Prabhupada nodded and continued forcefully singing Hare Krishna. The young hippies were enthusiastic in singing and dancing, knowing that the kirtan usually lasted an hour. Some had grasped the Swami's word when he had spoken of fixing the mind on the personal form of the Supreme Lord, and they had understood when he had looked up at the deities and said, "Here is Krishna." Others hadn't followed but thought that it was just great and blissful to sing Hare Krishna and looked at the grinning, big eyed deities up on the altar amid the flower and billowing incense. Prabhupada watched with pleasure as one person after another took a turn at offering the candle before Lord Jagannath. This was a simple procedure for installing the deity. Although in big temples in India, the installation of deity was a complex, exact procedure requiring several days of continuous rituals directed by highly paid priests. In San Francisco, there was no Brahmana priest to pay, and many other standards would be impossible to maintain. For non-Hindus to handle Lord Jagannath and conduct his worship would be considered heresy by the caste-conscious Brahmanas of India. Except for Prabhupada, none of the persons present would have been allowed even to enter the temple at Jagannath Puri. The white man, the Westerner, was not allowed to see Lord Jagannath except once a year as he rode in his cart during the Rath Yatra festival. But these restrictions were social customs, not the scriptural injunctions. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has introduced deity worship and initiation for anyone regardless of caste, race, or nationality. And Bhakti Vinod Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's father, had longed for the day when the people of the West would mingle with their Indian brothers and chant Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada had come to the West to fulfill the desires and the vision of his spiritual master and of Bhakti Vinod Thakur by creating Vaishnavas among the Westerners. Now, if the Westerners were to become actual devotees, they would have to be given the deity service, deity worship. Otherwise, it would be more difficult for them to become purified. Srila Prabhupada was confident in his spiritual master's direction and in scriptures. He had faith that Lord Jagannath was especially merciful to the fallen. He prayed that the Lord of the universe would not be offended by his reception at New Jagannath Puri. When the kirtan ended, Prabhupada asked Haridas to bring him the candle. Prabhupada passed his hands across the flame and touched them to his forehead. Yes, he said, show everyone, each and everyone, whatever they can contribute. Here, take it like this and show everyone. He indicated that Haridas should present the candle before each person in the room so that all present could touch their hands to the flame as he had shown and then touch their foreheads. As Haridas went from person to person, a few devotees dropped some coins on the plate and others followed. Srila Prabhupada explained further. The Bhagavatam has recommended hearing, chanting, thinking, and worshipping. This process, which we just now introduced on the advent of Jagannath Swami, means that now this temple is now completely fixed. So this is the worshipping process. This is called Arati. So at the end of Kirtan, this Arati will go on, and the worshipping process is to take the heat of the light and whatever your condition is, pay something for the worship. So this simple process, if you follow, you just see how you realize the absolute truth. Another thing I request you, all the devotees, when you come to the temple, you bring some fruit and one flower. One fruit and one flower. If you can bring more fruit, more flower, it is very good. If not, it is not very expensive to bring one fruit and one flower and offer it to the deity. So I will request you, when you come to temple, you bring this. Whatever fruit it may be, it doesn't matter that you have to bring very costly fruit, any fruit, whatever you can afford, one fruit and one flower. He paused, looking around the room. Yes, now you can distribute prasadam. The guests sat in rows on the floor, and the devotees began serving prasadam, offering the first plate to Prabhupada. The food preparations were those Prabhupada had personally taught the devotees in the kitchen. Samosas, halwas, puris, rice, several cooked vegetables, fruit, chutneys, sweets, all the Sunday specials. The guests loved the prasadam and ate it as much as they could get. While the devotees, especially the expert women, served more and more prasadam, the guests relaxed and enjoyed an evening of feasting and convivial conversation. After Prabhupada tasted all the preparations, he looked up with raised eyebrows. Very nice preparations. All glories to the cookers. A few minutes later, as the feasting continued, Srila Prabhupada spoke into the microphone. Jagannath Swami Nayanapatagami Bhavatu Me. Howard, repeat this. Hayagriva swallowed, cleared his throat and spoke up. Jagannath Swami Nayanapatagami Bhavatu Me. Prabhupada, yes, this should be chanted. Jagannath Swami Nayanapatagami Bhavatu Me. A boy asked what it meant. Hagriva replied, Oh, Lord of the universe, please be present before me. When Prabhupada noticed an older, respectably dressed man leaving the room without receiving a feast plate, Prabhupada became concerned. Oh, why is he going away? Ask him to come. A boy ran after him, opening the temple door and calling, Please don't leave, Swamiji requests. As the man re-entered the storefront, Prabhupada requested, Please, take prasadam. And turning to the servers, he instructed, Give him first. And so feasting continued beneath the altar of Lord Jagannath and under the auspice of his servant, Srila Prabhupada. The next day, acting on a whim, the devotees took the Jagannath deity off the altar and carried him to Gold Gate Park for a kirtan. Within minutes, hundreds gathered in the meadow below Hippie Hill, dancing and chanting around Lord Jagannath. After several hours, the devotees returned him to the altar. Prabhupada disapproved. The deities should never leave the temple. The deities don't go out to see the people, except on a special occasion. They are not for parks for birds to drop stool on. If you want to see the deities, you have to visit them. Lord Jagannath's presence quickly beautified the temple. Devotees made garlands for him daily. Yadurani's painting of Lord Vishnu arrived from New York, and Govinda Dasi had painted a large portrait of Srila Prabhupada, which now hung beside his seat. Devotees also put Indian prints of Krishna on the walls. The lights flashing upon Lord Jagannath made his eyes seem to pulsate and his colors move and jump, and he became a special attraction in the psychedelic neighborhood of Haight-Ashbury. As Prabhupada had requested, devotees and guests began bringing offerings before the altar of Lord Jagannath. Hippies would come by and leave whatever they could, a stall of wheat, half of a loaf of bread, a box of saltines, a piece of fudge or candles, flowers or fruit. Hearing that before using something for yourself, you should first offer it to the God, some hippies began bringing their own new clothes and offering them with a prayer to Lord Jagannath before wearing them. These hippies didn't follow Lord Jagannath's instructions, but they wanted his blessings. Each night, the devotees performed the arati ceremony just as Prabhupada has taught them, taking turns offering a candle before Lord Jagannath. When the devotees asked whether they could add anything to the ceremony, Prabhupada said yes, they could also offer incense. He said there were many more details of deity worship, numerous enough to keep the devotees busy 24 hours a day. But if he were to tell them everything at once, they would faint. Speaking privately in his room to one of his disciples, Prabhupada said that during Kirtan in the temple, he thought of Lord Chaitanya dancing before Lord Jagannath. He told how Lord Chaitanya had traveled to Puri and danced before Lord Jagannath in such ecstasy that he had been unable to say anything more than Jug, Jug. Lord Chaitanya had been thinking, Krishna, for so long I wanted to see you, and now I am seeing you. When Lord Chaitanya had lived in Puri, as many as 500 men at a time would visit him, and every evening there would be a huge kirtan with four parties, each with four mridanga players and eight kartal players. One party this side and one party this side. Prabhupada explained. One party back side, one party front side, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the middle. They would all dance and the four parties would chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. That was going on every evening so long he stayed at Jagannath Puri. The devotees understood that there was a great difference between themselves and Swamiji. He had never been a hippie. He wasn't at home amid the illusion of Hetash berries, LSD, psychedelic posters, rock musicians, hippie jargon, and street people. They knew he was different, though sometimes they forgot. He spent so much time with them every day, eating with them, joking with them, depending on them, but then sometimes they would remember his special identity. When they chanted with him in the temple before Lord Jagannath, he, unlike them, would be thinking of Lord Chaitanya's kirtan before Lord Jagannath in the Puri. When Lord Chaitanya had seen Jagannath, he had seen Krishna, and his love for Krishna had been so great that he had gone mad. Prabhupada thought of these things to a degree far beyond what his disciples could understand, and yet he remained with them as their dear friend and spiritual instructor. He was their servant, teaching them to pray like him, to be able to serve Krishna. O Lord of the universe, kindly be visible unto me. Govindadasi had a question for Swamiji. He had mentioned briefly that Lord Chaitanya used to cry in separation from Krishna and had once even thrown himself into a river crying, "Where is Krishna?" She was unsure whether her question would be proper, but she waited for an opportunity to ask it. One evening after the lecture, when Prabhupada asked for questions and there were none, Govindadasi thought, "This is my chance," but she hesitated. Her question wasn't on the subject of his lecture, and besides, she didn't like to ask questions in public. "No question?" Srila Prabhupada looked around. Govindadasi thought Swamiji seemed disappointed that there was no questions. He had said several times that they should ask questions and clear up any doubts. Again he asked, "Have you got any questions?" Govindadasi, well, could you tell about Lord Chaitanya asking, hmm? Prabhupada said, Govindadasi, asking where is Krishna? Prabhupada, Govindadasi, could you tell about Lord Chaitanya asking where is Krishna and falling in water, or would that be not? Prabhupada smiled, yes, yes, very nice. Your question is very nice. Oh, I am very glad. Lord Chaitanya, he was the greatest symbol of Krishna Bhakti, a devotee of Krishna. So just see from his life. He never said that I have seen Krishna. Never said I have seen Krishna. He was mad after Krishna. That is the process of Chaitanya philosophy. It is viraha. Viraha means separation. Separation. Krishna, you are so good. You are so merciful. You are so nice. But I am so rascal. I am so full of sin that I cannot see you. I have no qualification to see you. So in this way, if one feels the separation of Krishna, Krishna, I want to see you, but I am so disqualified that I cannot see you. These feelings of separation will make you enriched in Krishna consciousness. Feeling of separation, not that Krishna, I have seen you, finished, all right, I have understood you, finished, all my business finished. No, perpetually thinking of yourself that I am unfit to see Krishna, that will enrich you in Krishna consciousness. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu displayed these feelings of separation. This is Radharani's separation. When Krishna went from Vrindavan to his place, his father's place, Radharani was feeling in that way, always mad after Krishna. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took the separation feeling of Radharani. That is the best way of worshipping Krishna, becoming Krishna consciousness. So you know that Lord Chaitanya fell on the sea. Krishna, if you are here. Krishna, if you are here. Similarly, the next devotee, Lord Chaitanya's direct disciples, the Goswamis, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, they also, the same disciplic succession, they also worship Krishna in that separation feeling. There is a nice verse about them. Srila Prabhupada sang, He Radhe Vraja Devi Ke Chilalite, He Nanda Suno Kuta, Shri Govardhana Kalpa Padapatale, Kalindi Vane Kuta, Goshantava iti Sarvato Vrajapure, Keder Mahavihvalau, Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghu Yugo, Sri Jiva Gopalako. I offer my respectful obeisances to the six Goswamis, namely Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Sanatana Goswami, Sri Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, Sri Raghunatha Dasa Goswami, Sri Jiva Goswami, Sri Gopala Bhatta Goswami, who were chanting very loudly everywhere in Vrindavan, shouting, Queen of Vrindavan, Radharani, O Lalita, O son of Nanda Maharaj, where are you all now? Are you just on the hill of the Govardhan, or are you under the trees on the bank of Yamuna? Where are you? These were their moods in executing Krishna consciousness. These Goswamis also, later on, when they were very much mature in devotional service, what were they doing? They were daily in the Vrindavan Dham, just like a madman. Krishna, where are you? That is the quality. It is very nice question. Srila Prabhupada paused and uttered a thoughtful hmm. He remained silent. They also remained silent, watching him. He sat cross-legged on the black velvet pillow on the redwood dais. His hands were folded, his eyes closed, and he became overpowered by inner feelings of ecstasy. Although the simple devotees present could not know what was happening, they could see him enter a deep inward state. They could feel the atmosphere transform into awesome devotional stillness. They kept their eyes fixed on him. A minute and a half passed. Srila Prabhupada uttered another thoughtful and opened his eyes. They were filled with tears. He reached over and grasped his kartal, which rattled in his hand, but he moved no further. Again he withdrew from external consciousness. Another minute of silence passed. The minute seemed extremely calm, yet intense and long. Another minute passed. After almost 4 minutes, Prabhupada cleared his throat and struck the kartal together, beginning the slow rhythm. A devotee began the one note drawn on the harmonium. Prabhupada sang, Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya Radha Ramana Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya, building the chanting to a lively pace. After about 10 minutes, the kirtan stopped and Prabhupada left the room. As the devotees rose and began their various duties, some leaving out the front door behind Prabhupada and going to the kitchen, others coming together for conversation, they all knew that their spiritual master had been intensely feeling separation from Krishna. They had no doubt that it was a deep ecstasy, because just by being in his presence during that long and special stillness, they also had felt a glimmer of the same love for Krishna. In the invitation of his disciple Srila Prabhupada agreed to hold a kirtan on the beach. On a Tuesday night, with no kirtan or lecture scheduled in the temple, he got into the back seat of one of the devotees' car. About a dozen initiated followers and a couple of dogs got into other cars, and together they traveled to the beach. When they arrived, some devotees went running across the beach, gathering driftwood and building a fire in the shelter of a sand dune. The late afternoon air was cool and there was a seaside wind. Prabhupada was dressed in a long checkered coat over a hooded sweatshirt. During the kirtan, he clapped and danced while the devotees joined hands, forming a circle around him. As the sun was setting, all the devotees faced the ocean, raising their arms and singing as loudly as they could. Hari bol, but with the surf pounding in on the coast and with great expanse of windy air around them, their kirtan sounded very small. Gathered around the fire, the devotees buried foil wrapped potatoes and foil wrapped apples filled with raisins and brown sugar under the coals. It was the idea, but Prabhupada was happy to comply with their ideas of California Kirtan fun. Haridas and Haigriva had composed a song about the sage Narada Muni and they sang it for Prabhupada. Do you know who is the first eternal spaceman of this universe? The first to send his wild, wild vibrations to all those cosmic superstations. For the song he always shouts sends the planets flipping out. But I'll tell you before you think me lonely that I am talking about Narada Muni, singing Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada loved. He liked anything that had chanting in it, and he asked them to compose more such songs for their countrymen. Walking together along the beach, they came up on an old dilapidated Dutch windmill. Mukunda, Prabhupada said, You should approach the government and tell them that we will restore this windmill if they let us build a temple on this site. Mukunda took it as a joke at first, but then he saw that Prabhupada was completely serious. Mukunda said he would inquire about it. Prabhupada, in his oversized checkered coat, buttoned up to the neck with the beloved center of the devotees outing. After their walk, he sat with them on the big log, eating baked potatoes smeared with melted butter, and when he finished, he threw his remnants to the dogs. At the night, as the night grew dark, stars appeared high over the ocean, and the devotees stood close around Prabhupada for a last kirtan. Then, just as in the temple, they bowed down, and Prabhupada called out the prayers to the Lord and the disciplic succession. But he ended, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to Pacific Ocean. They all laughed. Swamiji was doing what his disciples wanted, enjoying an evening kirtan cook out at the beach with them, and they were doing what he wanted, chanting the Mahamantra, becoming devotee of Krishna, and becoming happy. Hayagriva sat facing Prabhupada, alone with Prabhupada in his room. A few days before, Hayagriva had shown Prabhupada a play about Lord Chaitanya he had found in the library, and Prabhupada had said it wasn't bona fide. So Prabhupada decided to prepare an outline for a bona fide play and have Hayagriva write it. I will give you the whole plot complete, Srila Prabhupada said. Then all you will have to do is execute it. Prabhupada was in a relaxed, jolly mood, intent on relating the events of Lord Chaitanya's life. He had prepared an outline of 23 scenes and now he wanted to expound each one. Hayagriva had barely enough time to understand what Prabhupada was about to do and almost no time to prepare himself for note taking as Prabhupada began describing the first scene. First scene, he began, is that people are passing on the road with Sankirtan just as we do. There is a very nice procession with Mridanga and Kartal, and that Bagal and all people are doing Sankirtan in the ordinary way. We have to make a nice procession. The second scene shows as decorated blackish with Kali as decorated blackish with royal dress and very ugly features, and his queen is another ugly featured lady, so they are disturbed. They will talk amongst themselves that there is the Sankirtan movement now. So how shall we prosecute our business in this age of quarrel, Kali Yuga? In that scene, there will be in one corner two or three people drinking. The scene will be like that. The age of quarrel personified and his consort are sitting in the center. In one corner, someone is taking part in the drinking, and in another part, somebody is illicitly talking of lust and love with a woman. In another section, there is slaughtering of a cow, and in another section, gambling. In this way, that scene should be adjusted. And in the middle, the ugly man, Kali, and ugly woman will talk that we are now in danger. The Sankirtan movement has been started. What to do? In this way, you have to finish that scene. Then the third scene is very nice, Rasa dance. Hai Gauriva interrupted. He had some of his own ideas about what he called the dramatic point of view. I think Haigriva said, strongly articulating his words. This can apply for the whole world in the scene that the names may be Indian, but I think the exhibition you described of the assembly of Kali and his concert sin and exhibition of illicit sex and the slaughterhouse can all be from Western prototypes. Srila Prabhupada said that he had no objection to Hayagriva's suggestion, but that he didn't want people to think he was singling out Westerners as if they were the only ones who committed illicit sex. Hayagriva was about to reply, but decided that this was no time to quibble. Swamiji was eager to go on describing the pastimes of Chaitanya. Prabhupada. Rasa dance means Krishna and Radha Rani in the center and the gopis are surrounding. You have to see, so you have seen that surrounding scene when they were dancing with us the other day in the park, hand to hand. Haigriva, yes, yes. Prabhupada. So one Krishna and one gopi, they are dancing. That should be the scene. Then the rasa dance should be stopped, and Krishna will talk with the gopis. Krishna will say to the gopis that, my dear friends, you have come to me in the dead of night. It is not very good because it is the duty of every woman to please her husband. So, what your husband will think if you come in such a dead of night? So, please go back. So, in this way, the gopis will reply, you cannot request us to go back because with great difficulty and with great ecstatic desire we have come to you, and it is not your duty to ask us to go back. In this way, you arrange some talking that Krishna is asking them to go back, but they are insisting, no, let us continue our rasa dance. Then, when the rasa dance is finished, the gopis will go, and then Krishna will say, these gopis are my heart and soul. They are so sincere devotees, they do not care for family encumbrances or bad name. They come to me, so how shall I repay them? He was thinking, how shall I repay their ecstatic love? So he thought that I cannot repay them unless and until I take up their situation to understand me. But I myself cannot understand me. I have to take the position of the gopis, how they are loving me. So, with that consideration, he took the form of Lord Chaitanya. Therefore, Krishna is blackish and Lord Chaitanya is the color of the gopis. The whole life of Lord Chaitanya is the representation of gopis' love towards Krishna. That should be painted in the picture of this scene. Do you have anything to ask? Hagreva, this is my determination to incarnate as Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya? Yes. Hagreva, in order to, Prabhupada, in order to appreciate Krishna in the form of a gopi. Just like I have got dealings with you, so you have to go, so you have got your individuality and I have got my individuality. But if I want to study how you are so much obedient and loving to me, then I have to go to your position. It is very natural psychology. You have to paint in that way. Prabhupada described and explained one story after another, most of them new to Hayagriva. Hayagriva couldn't properly spell or even pronounce the names. He didn't know who Lord Chaitanya's mother was or whether Nityananda was a devotee. And when Prabhupada told the story of Kshira Chor Gopinath, the deity who stole condensed milk for his devotee, Hayagriva got confused and thought Prabhupada had said that Lord Chaitanya had stolen the condensed milk. Prabhupada, no, hmm, you did not hear. Chaitanya, after seeing the deity, he was sitting and seeing. And meanwhile, Nityananda Prabhu narrated the story how the deity's name became Kshirchor Gopinath. You do not follow me? Hayagriva groped. Nityananda, Prabhupada, Nityananda was going with Lord Chaitanya. Hayagriva. Nityananda was narrating this to Lord Chaitanya. Prabhupada. Yes, the deity was known as Kshirachor Gopinath. The story, Prabhupada repeated for 3 times, was narrated that formerly he stole one pot of condensed milk for his devotee. Hayagriva. Now what direct relationship does this have to Lord Chaitanya? Prabhupada. Lord Chaitanya visited this temple. Anyone in those days going to Jagannath Puri from Bengal had to pass that way, and on the way, Shirchor Gopinath temple is there. So everyone used to visit. Formerly, Madhavendra Puri also visited, and for him the deity stole the condensed milk. From that day, the deity is known as Kshirachor Gopinath. That story was narrated to to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So while sitting before the deity, the story was narrated. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu realized that God is so kind that sometimes he steals for his devotee. This is the significance. So here the scene should be arranged that it is a very nice temple. The deity is within and Lord Chaitanya has entered while chanting Hare Krishna. And then he saw the worship arti. These things are to be shown in this scene, and a little story about him. That's all. When Prabhupada told of Lord Chaitanya's visit to Sakshi Gopal temple, Hayagriva asked, I again got lost. Do you follow? Prabhupada asked. No, Hayagriva chuckled. No. Eventually, Hayagriva stopped asking questions and interrupting. Although he had very little knowledge of the identity or meaning of the characters, as soon as he had heard a little about them, he had been trying to adjust and rearrange their activities from the dramatic point of view. Prabhupada had raised no objections to Hayagriva's inquiries. In fact, Prabhupada had invited them so that Hayagriva could understand how to present the play. Hayagriva, however, decided to first try to hear what Prabhupada was saying. By the end of first hour of their talk, Prabhupada had narrated many scenes from the first half of Lord Chaitanya's life. His teasing the Brahmanas by the Ganges at the age of 5, his civil disobedience movement against the Muhammadan magistrate, his accepting the renounced order at age 24, his last meeting with his beloved mother, his traveling to Puri and touring South India, his meeting and instructing disciples like Sarvabhauma, Ramananda Raya, and Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami. Finally, Prabhupada's morning schedule permitted him to go no further. It was time for him to bath and take lunch. The next day they would meet again. At the next session, Hayagriva listened more carefully, and the transcendental scenes came quickly, one after another. As Prabhupada described each scene, speaking the words and thoughts of Lord Chaitanya and his associates, Prabhupada seemed to be seeing the scenes enacted before him. He especially became moved when he spoke of Lord Chaitanya and Haridas Thakur. The life of Haridas Thakur, Srila Prabhupada said, is that he was born in a Mohammedan family. Some way or other he became a devotee and he was chanting 300,000 names, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made him the Acharya, the authority of chanting. Therefore, we glorify him Namacharya Haridas Thakur ki Jai because he was made the Acharya, the authority of chanting Hare Krishna. When Lord Chaitanya took sannyas, Haridas Thakur decided, my dear Lord, you are leaving Navadvip. Then what is the use of my life? Either you take me or let me die. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, no, why shall you die? You come here with me. So he took him to Jagannath Puri. In Jagannath Puri, because he considered himself born of a Mohammedan family, Haridas did not enter the temple. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave him a place at Kashinath Mishra's house. There he was chanting and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was sending him prasadam. In that way he was passing his days and Chaitanya used to come and see him daily. Srila Prabhupada wanted a scene for the passing away of Haridas Thakur. Hayagriva. Is this the same Haridas the Mohammedan threw into the river? Yes, Prabhupada said. Then very casually Hayagriva mused aloud. So he finally met his end there in fifth scene? Prabhupada hesitated. Here again Hayagriva revealed his lack of transcendental knowledge, talking as though Hayagriva's passing away was the same as an ordinary man's meeting his end. All right, Hayagriva cued him. What is this particular incident? Prabhupada. The particular incident is significant. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a Brahmana and he was a sannyas. According to social custom, he should not even touch a Mohammedan. But this Haridas Thakur was a Mohammedan and yet at his death he took the body himself and danced. And he put him in the graveyard and distributed prasadam. Because Haridas was a Mohammedan, he did not enter the temple of Jagannath Puri because the Hindus were very strict. Haridas was a devotee, but he thought, why should I create some row? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appreciated Haridas' humble behavior. Although he had become a devotee, he was not forcibly going to the temple. But then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself was daily coming and seeing him. While going to take bath in the sea, he will first of all see Haridas. Haridas, what you are doing? Haridas will offer his respect and he will sit and talk for some time. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will go and take his bath. In this way, one day when he came, he saw Haridas not feeling very well. Haridas, how is your health? Yes, sir, it is not very. After all, it is the body. Then the third day he saw that Haridas is going to leave his body today. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked him, Haridas, what do you desire? Both of them could understand. Haridas said that this is my last stage. If you kindly stand before me. Srila Prabhupada became caught in the intense spiritual emotion of the scene as if it were happening before him. He closed his eyes. He stopped talking. Then he began again slowly, haltingly. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu stood before him and he left his body. Prabhupada sighed and became silent. Hayagriva sat staring at the floor. When he glanced up, he saw that Swamiji was crying. Prabhupada quickly summed up a few last scenes and ended his outline. Now you write, he told Hagriva, and I shall make some addition or alteration. This is the synopsis and framework. Now you can proceed. Hagriva left the room. The material was lengthy, and whether he would ever write the play was doubtful, but he was thankful to have received this special discourse. Sitting on a bridge table in the student lounge, chanting into a little microphone while his followers played their instruments, Prabhupada began the kirtan at Stanford University. At first, there were about 20 students, but gradually more entered the lounge and gathered around. Everyone was chanting. Then suddenly the lounge became transformed as more than 200 Stanford students, most of them completely new to the Hare Krishna movement, mantra, danced and chanted with as much enthusiasm as the most uninhibited Haight Ashbury crowd. Prabhupada led the kirtan for more than an hour. In his talk afterwards, he explained what they had all just experienced. This Hare Krishna dance is the best process for getting out of this illusion that I am this body. Our society is trying to distribute to the world the priceless gift of the of the Lord. You did not understand the words, but you still felt the ecstasy to dance. Prabhupada took questions from the audience. Everything proceeded in a standard fashion until someone asked whether college students should respond to military draft. Prabhupada replied that since they had elected their own government, there was no use complaining if the government told them to go to the war. But some of the students, the same students who had chanted and danced only minutes before, began to shout, "No, no." Prabhupada tried explaining his point, but they raised their voices in anger until the hall became a bedlam of shouting. Finally, Srila Prabhupada picked up his kartals and began chanting again, and the dissenters left. The next day, the Palo Alto Times ran a front page story with headlines and a photo of Kirtan. Ancient trance dance features Swami's visit to Stanford. Hold on there a minute, all you with it people. There's a new dance about to sweep the country. It's called the Swami. It's going to replace the frog, Watusi swim, and even the good old barn stomp. Why? Because you can do any old step to it, and at the same time find real happiness. You can rid yourself of the illusion that you and your body are inseparable. The chant started quietly but gained volume as more people joined in. After half an hour, a long-haired youth with 3 strings of red beads around his neck stood up and began to dance to the music. He closed his eyes in ecstasy and held his hands palms up shoulder high. Two girls soon followed him. One had a string of bells around her neck. A bearded fellow with a fluorescent pink skull cap joined in, still beating on his tambourine. The Swami cut in a microphone in front of him, and the added volume provoked others to chant and stomp more loudly. A pretty girl in a sari danced as if in a hypnotic trance. A short, dark man, neatly dressed in suit and tie, threw off his shoes and joined in. A young math professor did likewise. A pretty blonde 3-year-old girl rocked and swayed in one corner. Suddenly most of the audience was dancing and chanting. The pace grew faster and faster. Faces streamed with sweat, the temperature soared. Then it all stopped. Srila Prabhupada was pleased with the article and asked for some photocopies of it. What are they calling the dance? He laughed. The Swami. Across the top of the Kirtan photo he typed, "Everyone joins in complete ecstasy when Swami Bhaktivedanta chants his hypnotic Hare Krishna." The devotees got Prabhupada an engagement at YMCA where the audience consisted almost entirely of children. The devotees had decorated the wall with posters of Krishna and hung a big sign with the Maha Mantra on it. The children chanted along with Prabhupada during Kirtan. Just before the lecture, Gurudas reminded him maybe the talk should be simple since they are all between 9 and 14 years old. Prabhupada nodded silently. Is there a student here who is intelligent? Prabhupada began. No, One responded. After a moment, a 12-year-old boy, urged by his teacher and fellow students, raised his hand. Prabhupada motioned for him to come forward. The boy wore thick glasses, short pants, and a blazer, and his hair was combed back very neatly. Pointing to the boy's head, Prabhupada asked, "What is that?" The boy almost coughed at the simpleness of the question. "My head?" Prabhupada then pointed to the boy's arm and said quietly, "What is that?" "My arms," the boy said. Prabhupada then pointed to the boy's foot. "What is that?" "My foot," the boy answered, still looking incredulous. "Yes," Srila Prabhupada said, "you say this is my head, my arm, my foot, my body. But where are you?" The boy stood perplexed, unable to answer Prabhupada's simple question. "We say my hand," Srila Prabhupada continued, "but who is the owner of my hand?" "We say my hand, so that means someone owns my hand. But where does the owner live?" "I do not say I hand, I say my hand. So my hand and I are different. I am within my body, and you are within your body. But I am not my body, and you are not your body. We are different from the body. Real intelligence means to know who I am." Haight Ashbury's psychedelic shop, a popular hippie gathering place, had extended to Prabhupada's many invitations to come and speak. After the mantra rock dance, the hippies there had put a sign in the window, "A Night of Consciousness." Also, in response to the mantra rock dance, they had opened a meditation room in the rear of their store. But since the hippies at the psychedelic shop were almost always intoxicated, Prabhupada's followers had said that it wouldn't be a good idea for Prabhupada to go. But the hippies kept entreating. Finally, the devotees relented, advising Prabhupada it might be all right for him to go. So on Saturday night, Prabhupada and two devotees walked over to Haight Street to the psychedelic shop. Young people crowded the streets, hippies sitting along the sidewalk selling hashish pipes and other dope paraphernalia, homosexuals, wild costumed hippies with painted faces, small groups smoking marijuana, drinking, singing, and playing guitars, a typical evening on the Haight Street. At the psychedelic shop, marijuana and tobacco smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with smell of alcohol and bodies. Prabhupada entered the meditation room, its ceiling and walls covered with madrasas, and sat down. The room was full of hippies, many lying down, heavily intoxicated, looking up at him with half-closed eyes. He spoke in a low voice, but his presence somehow held their attention. Although lethargic, the group was appreciative, and after Prabhupada had finished, those who were still conscious expressed their approval. On Saturday, April 1st, near the end of his stay in San Francisco, Prabhupada accepted an invitation from Lou Gottlieb, head of Star Ranch, a nudist hippie commune. Morning Star was a bunch of young people living in the woods. The devotees explained to Prabhupada the hippies they had spiritual aspirations. They grew vegetables and worshipped the sun. They would hold hands and listen to the air, and naturally they were involved in a lot of drug taking and free sex. When Love came in the morning to pick up Swami, they talked, and Swami gave him a rasagulla, a sweet made of bite-sized balls of curd simmered in sugar water. After a few minutes together in Prabhupada's room, they started for Morning Star, 60 miles north of San Francisco. Gottlieb. I told Swamiji to fasten his seat belt. He said no. He said Krishna will handle it or something. So on the way out, I was showing off all my vast erudition in having read a biography of Ramakrishna. That's when Bhaktivedanta gave the best advice to aspirant I ever heard. We were talking about Ramakrishna and Vivekananda and Aurobindo and this and that. So he said, you know, putting a gentle hand on my knee, when you have found your true path, all further investigations of comparative religion is merely sense enjoyment. Situated in a forest of redwoods more than 200 feet, all Morning Star Ranch occupied what had once been an egg farm. Some of the land had been cleared for farming. There were a few tents, some unsubstantial little huts, a couple of tree houses, but the only decent insulated building was Lois Place, an old chicken house. The commune had about 100 full-time members, with the number of residents rising to as many as 300 on weekends. In the warm weather, when people would come out to work in the garden or just walk around naked and get high. Prabhupada arrived at 1 in the afternoon on a beautiful sunny day. He first wanted to rest, so Law offered his own house. Walking to Law's place, Prabhupada noticed a few nude men and women hoving in the garden. One of the workers, a short, stocky young man, Herbie Bresak, stopped his work in the garden and came to greet the Swami. Herbie, Lou Gottlieb introduced us. We were planting potatoes at that time. He said, "This is Swami Bhaktivedanta." I came out of the garden and shook Swamiji's hand. I said, "Hello, Swami." He asked me, "What are you doing?" I told him that I was just planting potatoes. He then asked me what I was doing with my life. I didn't answer. After resting for a few minutes, Prabhupada was ready for the kirtan. He and Law went to a hilly pasture where the hippies had placed a wooden seat for Prabhupada before a bower of wild flowers arranged like a bandshell. Prabhupada took his seat and began chanting. The commune members, all of whom had been anticipating Swami's visit, gathered eagerly for the group meditation. Mike Morrissey. Some people had clothes on and some people didn't. Some were dancing around, but Swamiji wasn't looking at our bodies. He was looking at our souls and giving us the mercy we needed. The kirtan was well received. One of the members of the commune was so enthralled by the kirtan that he decided to put on his clothes and go back to San Francisco with the Swami. Prabhupada spoke very briefly and then he prepared to leave, shaking hands and exchanging courtesies as he walked to the car. Although Srila Prabhupada hadn't spoken much philosophy, his kirtan left a deep impression on the hippies at the Morning Star. While leaving, he had told one of the young men, "Keep chanting this Hare Krishna mantra here," and they did it. And they did. Law Gottlieb. The Swami was an extremely intelligent guy with a job to do. There was no sanctimony or holy pretension, none of that. Eyes lifted silently to the sky. All I remember is just a very pleasant, incredibly safe feeling. There's no doubt that the Maha Mantra, once you get the mantra into your head, it's here, it's there. It never stops. It's in the cells. It awakens the DNA or something. Shortly thereafter, half of the people at the Morning Star got seriously into chanting. Those that did were extremely sincere God seekers. Their aspiration was 1,000% sincere, considering the circumstances in which they were found. They were all dopers, that's for sure, but they definitely gave that up once they got in touch with the Mahamantra. His top cloth wrapped loosely around his shoulders, Prabhupada stood a last moment by the open door of the car and looked back in farewell to the devotees and the storefront temple. It was no longer a mere storefront but had become something worthy. New Jagannath Puri. Srila Bhakti Saraswati had asked him to come here. Who among his godbrothers could imagine how crazy these American hippies were, hallucinating on drugs, crying out, "I am God," so many girls and boys unhappy, mad despite their wealth and education. But now, through Krishna consciousness, some were finding happiness. The first day he had arrived, the reporters had asked him why he had come to Haight Ashbury. "Because the rent is cheap," he had replied. His desire was to spread the movement of Lord Chaitanya. Why else would he had come to such a dilapidated little storefront to live next to a Chinese laundry and digger's front free store? The reporters had asked if he were inviting the hippies and bohemians to take to Krishna consciousness. Yes, he said, everyone. But he had known that Once joining him, his followers would become something different from what they had been before. Now the devotees were a family. If they followed his instructions, they would remain strong. If they were sincere, Krishna would help them. Lord Jagannath was present, and the devotees would have to worship him faithfully. They would be purified by chanting Hare Krishna and following their spiritual master's instructions. Prabhupada got into the car, accompanied by some of his disciples, and a devotee drove him to the airport. Several carloads of devotees followed him behind. At the airport, the devotees were crying, but Prabhupada assured them he would return if they would hold a Rath Yatra festival. You must arrange a procession down the main street, he told them. Do it nicely. We must attract many people. They have such a procession yearly in Jagannath Puri. At this time, the deity may leave the temple. He would have to return, he knew, to tend the delicate devotional plants he had placed in their hearts. Otherwise, how could he expect these neophytes to survive in the ocean of material desires known as hate ashbury? Repeatedly, he promised them he would return. He asked them to cooperate among themselves. Mukunda, Shyamasundara, Gurudas, Jayananda, Subala, Gaurasundara, Hayagriva, Haridas, and the girls. Only 2.5 months ago, he had arrived here at this very terminal, greeted by a throng of chanting young people. Many were now his disciples, although just barely assuming their spiritual identities and vows. Yet he felt no compunctions about leaving them. He knew that some of them might fall away, but he couldn't stay with them always. His time was limited. Srila Prabhupada, the father of two small bands of neophytes, tenderly left one group and headed east, where the other group waited in a different mood and a mood of joyful reception. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Satsvarup Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Hare Krishna. Another lengthy, long recitation. I don't know how many survived. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji. Nice long narration, but very joyful. Prabhuji, one I was thinking that so when the devotees were cheated by that businessman, by that time they did not receive the letters of Prabhupada, or was it like this, or they have already received but still they approached the businessman?
There were some series of letters and calls and everything, and also after cheating, also there were some mails. Both.
Okay, so
The
that's why Prabhupada
guidance, yeah,
not
the
following.
guidance. Yeah, when Prabhupada understood that Brahmananda Prabhu is being cheated, so he also sent mails to others to kind of attend. Hmm? Those came, and in spite of that, because of the pressure that Brahmananda Maharaj, yeah, he was going through, so he was cheated. So after that, again, a series of letters came.
Okay, so before also Brahmananda Prabhu received the letter that be careful and be
Yeah,
cheated.
yeah.
But
So that is the reason it says, instructions were given but were not followed.
yes, yes, Prabhuji.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Then thank you so much. Have a nice evening. Yeah, you can very nice have this in uh, uh, your sleep time. Remember them and understand who is Prabhupada, how great he is, what he has done in 2 months of time. Yeah, we are struggling to set up something for years. Prabhupada managed to establish center in 2 months. Yeah, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vanchakalpatarabhyascha कृपा सिन्धुभ्यः वच पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.